Okay, welcome back to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast. This is Bryan. I am here with Colin and Peter, and man, we're in the official grind part of the season. We've got all of our majors finished, and we've got no Olympic golf because that just finished. Even though we do still have the Olympics, just the golf tournament finished, and pretty exciting. It was cool to see golf in the Olympics for sure. But now we're just grinding these tournaments for the rest of the year. Colin, Pete, what's going on, guys?
Waited with clenched teeth until NFL season is here. Less than a month, guys. We can totally do this. We have PGA here to get you through the gap.
Definitely. The Olympics was a lot of fun. Great week of golf with 2 tournaments going on last week. And certainly, even though it's, there's nothing huge to look forward to, so the FedEx finish will be great. There's still the $1 million DraftKings Golf Championship and some other fun things going on. So it'll be fun to see what happens down the stretch here on the PGA Tour. Yeah,
and there's still definitely good tournaments on DraftKings this week. There's the dog leg, which is $50K to first place for a $33 entry. So still a lot of good options for PGA throughout the rest of the year. So that's definitely exciting. We'll definitely be here with our podcast every week and get our analysis on it. So, all right, let's quickly touch on what we learned. And Colin, I guess you can glow since you took Great Britain to win the Olympics, and they ended up beating out Stenson in Sweden for the victory. So you can take your 10 seconds to gloat here.
God save the Queen. Was happy that, all of that rigorous analysis that totally went into it and me changing my mind at the last minute pulled through for me in the win. We, of course, provide nothing but the most robust analytics here at FantasyLabs, and me with a last-minute win for Great Britain. Evening the scoreboard here is proof of that. So hopefully we'll get this settled by the end of the year because this can't end in a tie. That would just be a way bigger disaster. As far as actual stuff with what I learned, I don't know. I keep wondering about the Olympics. It was a no cut. It was a no course. It's just I'm more wondering when will we ever see such an anomalous set of playing conditions like that, and if there's anything we can generalize. I don't have an answer for that, but I'm just still kind of in marvel of the spectacle of man, that was a weird week to prep for. Usually we usually have something to go off of, but that was one of the least prepared weeks that we have in terms of history, in terms of fit, in terms of all of that stuff. And it's just so atypical from everything else, to say nothing of the narratives. So I don't know, Pete, what's the next closest thing you can think of, which is a tournament of one of these things is not like the others in PGA?
I don't know if I can think of anything I don't know. I'm kind of stuck on that one, but it was fun to watch. Did you watch any of this, Colin, or did you continue to
zero as usual?
Not even the Olympics. That's what I was going to say. Maybe that makes it unique, is that you actually watched it. But it was great.
No, good try. Yeah.
And the other thing I learned last week is if you don't have the guy who has a hole-in-one on your team, you're in big trouble in tournaments.
So get all those ones and
we need a slider for hole-in-ones because I'm sure it's
absolutely that's a skill, definitely.
That's a skill. Adjusted round score on hole-in-ones.
Yeah, adjusted holes-in-one. Yeah,
adjusted holes-in-one. Yeah.
Now we're talking.
So just quickly, some things I have seen just around the community is people talking about stars and scrubs and how obviously in a no-cut event it sort of lends itself to that strategy. And Pete, I want to ask you about this because I know you play the Thunderdome, which is the 5K tournament on DraftKings. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Rupe Cacao. Was 14% owned. It was sort of a cheap play. Is that was there something sharper on him in the Olympics, or was that just the stars and scrubs strategy just manifesting itself in that tournament?
I think it was more of the stars and scrubs. I mean, maybe I missed something and didn't realize I was sharp, but people were just...
I recommended him on the podcast. Obviously, I'm driving up ownership around here, so the FantasyLabs factor, easy one. Next question.
That part is true. I knew he was definitely in consideration, but the ownership, I think, had a lot to do with roster construction. Okay. A lot of guys like Cole Sartz ended up being high, Bordy was high. I mean, it was all the same names that we kind of expected. So just depending on roster construction for people. And, it was a very interesting week. And the John Deere was fun, too. Much different event that obviously there was a cut, and a lot of guys did get cut. I saw about 3 or 4% of people got through with 6 of 6 in that event. So definitely totally different tournaments, but one thing that we'll continue to, be able to utilize down the road is in these no-cut events. I think it lends itself to stars and scrubs even more than other tournaments where the cut, obviously, you need the guys who are more consistent in that format.
Yeah, and Colin, you did mention him, so I'll give you credit on that. But I was a little shocked to see his ownership so high in a high stakes tournament like that. So definitely something to keep in mind whenever we have a no-cut tournament again, and we'll call that out once we get there. All right, so let's move on to this week's tournament. We have a PGA tournament which starts early. It's at the 6 a.m. cut or 6 a.m. lock time. It's the Wyndham Championship in Greensboro, North Carolina. We also have a Euro event, which is the Czech Masters. Pete or Colin, rather, I'll let you give your Euro minutes breakdown here of the Czech Masters. What are your thoughts on this? And then we'll move on to do our whole pod analysis of the Wyndham.
So the Euro event, the Czech Masters, it's at this course Albatross, which they've only played for 2 years, and the course fit statistics, even in a limited sample, are kind of really all over the place. So I would consider them almost unreliable. There is some level of history the guys have here, so there's something to go off of here. It's definitely one of the weaker events in terms of in the field. You have guys like Thomas Pieters and Andy Sullivan that are headlining it. I've been bearish on them in general, especially relative to everyone else, so it's kind of weird to see them priced so high. So I definitely recommend way more of a balanced approach this go around. I think if I had to pick a top-heavy guy, Bradley Dredge is back in my good graces, and I think he's probably the pound-for-pound best one over 9K. Outside of that, the mid-range has some pretty good options with Richard Bland, Tommy Fleetwood, and Jakob Enzil. Value picks, there are a couple of guys that tend to jump as usual. Ryan Evans is a guy who has a very limited sample, so there's some risk in there, but for a GPP flyer, I think it's fine. Mikko Korhonen, just another one of the Finnish players that just kind of seem to pop up every week and are producing solid value. And Florian Fritsch, who, as best I can tell, has a decent course fit here, even though it's a little bit more unreliable, but he's kind of the only one that kind of comes out with a decent fit there. And I've touted him before in value, so that's my Euro minute. Proceed with caution because it's so unreliable as far as the past history this week.
Cool. Yeah, and that has an early start time as well. Locks at midnight Eastern time on Thursday. It's at top of that, good old Thomas Pieters. This was sort of funny. In the Olympic golf tournament, he shot a 67, 66, 65, and a 77. Which round stood out to you there? Crazy.
Oh, man.
Fourth place with a 77 in a round. Just
humidity must have gotten to him or something. I don't know.
Yeah, if he had Pieters, that was a tilting round for sure, that third round. All right, let's move on to this week. So, Colin, I'll kick right back to you here. So this tournament is the Wyndham Championship. It's in Greensboro. It's been here for forever. Almost 100 years since 1930. It's been sort of it was started at Sedgefield, moved to a different course, and then moved back full time in 2008. So we do have some pretty solid course data here, and I think we can be pretty confident in sort of course fit and in course history for our golfers. Colin, what sort of players does this course lend itself to?
It's a par 70, so that usually favors the accuracy guys, and that bears out in course fit as well. Pick your combination of driving accuracy and GIR, and proceed accordingly. So definitely your Furicks, your Moores, your some guys in the 6K range, you can already guess who they're going to be, but I'd say that's an accuracy course for sure. Pete, does that jive with what you know just from watching it?
It does. Definitely an accuracy course here. And the nice thing is we do have a lot of course history and pretty much matches up with that as well. So I feel really good about it. And I think it's going to be a fun course to kind of go after guys. And I actually really like this tournament. A lot of good names in it.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Before we get into our players, and we'll break down by tiers, I have some questions for you guys that I usually come up with. And one question, Pete, just I was thinking about, we're in this this later part of the season grind with no majors and no Olympic golf, so we may have some just sort of a different group of players on DraftKings playing. So for people who are playing or maybe just want to get into it, I don't know, whoever is listening to this, what would you recommend? Would you say that they should change their approach to bankroll management or their approach to how they distribute their games, or just sort of proceed as normal?
Well, I think that right now is the time in golf where you're definitely having a grinded out strategy more than really trying to make it big. I think the majors are the one spot where if you're grinding golf or a big golf fan, that you could potentially risk a higher percentage of your bankroll, because I think that those are the most inefficient games just because more casual people play the majors and things of that nature. So yeah, the competition is going to be a little bit tougher right now, but the nice thing is there's a ton of data, and I really feel like with FantasyLabs and listening to Colin, you can come up with a pretty nice edge, and I feel really good. I mean, I'm right in the groove of golf season. The guys you like, and it's just another great spot here where accuracy and actually course history, I think, matters more than usual. So I think the approach is just continue to grind, and if you're just getting into it, maybe start off with a little less, because the waters are a little bit tougher right now than they are, for the majors.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with all of that. We don't talk a whole lot about bankroll management on this podcast because I think we cover it pretty well in our general articles. But I think it's one of the most underutilized part of being successful in DFS. There are tomes at this point on things like the Kelly criterion and understanding how to quantify your edge. I think people could stand to actually keep better records and really quantify and understand, okay, what is my edge here and how do I bet accordingly? And know when to throttle back, more importantly. If you play NBA a lot, that's maybe a little bit easier because on some of those short game slates, you probably have a little bit less of an edge because it's tough to differentiate yourself, right? Everyone has the same play, so people kind of naturally throttle back. It's a lot less clear on when you might want to do that in golf. It kind of requires an understanding of the ecosystem, but I think we're all right on the head here. The games are probably going to get tougher in between now until NFL, at which point we're basically on hiatus anyway, so it probably is wiser to throttle back a little bit these next couple of weeks.
Yeah, for sure. Good thoughts on that. Yeah, it's I've gotten some questions about just how to deal with the grind. So good thoughts there. A couple more questions, and Pete, I'll start with you on this one. I'm sort of curious. You just sort of looking at DraftKings plus minus on these recent tournaments in the past maybe 3 or 4 weeks. It seems that plus minuses have been a little bit higher for recent metrics, and I'm curious. If you have any thoughts on this theory that recent form matters more towards the end of the year than it does at the beginning of the year. And this, we sort of see that in any sport, like the more data we have on a single season is, the more predictive or the more confident we can have in data. But I'm curious your thoughts on golf, just because it's sort of a rolling year as opposed to, a very defined season like NFL or NBA.
Right. Well, I want to definitely toss it to Colin because I'm curious opinion too. Speculating on my end, I do think that, towards the end of the year or right now, kind of in the middle of the summer when these guys are playing the most tournaments, when they're playing tournaments that matter, especially right now. I mean, these guys are coming off multiple majors, the Olympics. They're coming off a variety of tournaments with big prize pools, or big purses, I should say. So I think that these guys are right in the middle of the grind, and capturing the guys that are hot right now makes sense to me. I don't know how much of an edge it would be, but Colin, I'm curious your opinion on this.
I have always assumed, like I did with tennis, that because it's just like you said, Brian, because it's kind of a rolling sport and there isn't really an off season, that the beginning and the end are essentially arbitrary dates that we're assigning. And so until you're strongly proven otherwise, I would just treat all time weightings the same at every point in time of the year. And even Pete, when you say that, these guys, golfers are not a uniform bunch. There are the top level guys that can maybe afford to, optimize your schedules. And then there are the cusp guys who are probably playing in every single tournament trying to, quote unquote, grind out a living. It's still good money, but it's way more of a grind than those top level guys. So I think the platonic ideal is some sort of all right, given how good you are, how do you time weight results in general? But Bryan, if you're seeing that, recent form matters more at this point, you could probably guess I have pretty conservative standards as far as okay, will I go back and weight that or maybe look at it differently? The short answer is I don't know, but that's one that's easily testable. What happens if I weight recent form more in August and September versus February? So it's one of the many, and we don't get much of an off season here, it's maybe 6 weeks, but that is a great off season homework assignment for sure.
And I guess the question really just comes down to how much do you trust Vegas to deal with recent form? Just because I think if you think that there is a time when recent form is more important for golfers at a certain time of the year, then naturally there would be some edge because golf is just unique in that it's odds based in its pricing, where it's not necessarily recent play based in its pricing. Like in baseball, right. If a batter gets hot, he's going to have a salary increase, whereas they don't necessarily do that on DraftKings for golfers unless Vegas sort of does that themselves. So I guess that would be the question, is whether Vegas themselves actually price these golfers up. I don't know.
Yeah, if anything, there's probably a bias towards overpricing recent results because people have recency bias. So, my natural inclination is to, exploit recency bias and kind of assume that people weighted a little bit too much. I think we have the weighting about right. But yeah, it's a separate question about can you find value out of that? I agree.
Gotcha. Okay. And last question. This is something that actually in your article that you wrote today, Colin, this question came to my mind after reading that, and I would encourage people to go read that. Colin finished his thoughts on these non-projection metrics and his thoughts on how to do lineup reviews, and really good thoughts here. But my question is, is course fit more important for cut making or total finishing? And I think that, we just sort of say this course is important for this golfer, but, does it matter more for making the cut, or does it matter equally so for, where a golfer finishes?
Based on what I found, I think it's it doesn't matter any more or less as long as you can price it in on average, then that's about the best you can do. So, it's kind of a neutral, somewhere between equally important, but there's no buy. That's allowed. It's allowed to be equally important or properly priced in. There's nothing saying it has to be more important, one or less, but I'd say it's about the same for both.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to whether course fit increases a player's upside or increases their floor or their ceiling. But I guess in a cut event, if it increases their floor, then it sort of naturally increases their ceiling.
Yeah, that kind of goes. So basically, it increases their average. So yeah, it kind of increases both ceilings. So yeah, it's not skewed in one way or another. So if it's equal on both sides, then that just means it's average. There's no game selection component to that.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Well, those are my questions. Thanks for answering those, guys. As always, feel free to tweet us any questions. We'll do our best to answer them every week. All right, let's move into our player analysis, and we'll do our usual player tiers here. We'll break it into 3 groups. The first group that we'll hit on is going to be the value tier. It's going to be guys that are 6'9" on DraftKings and lower, and then our middle tier is going to be 7K to 8'9", and then we'll do our top tier, which is going to be 9,000 and higher. Pete, you want to start with the lower tier?
Sure, I'll start with the low tier. Chez Reavie is the number 1 guy at 6,300. He's actually not the number 1 guy in my model in this price range. One guy who's ranking really high in my model is Henrik Norlander, who I think is a really good play as well. But before hearing Colin's opinion, I do think that Reavie is still the number 1 guy for me in this spot, although Norlander has had some pretty good results. He hasn't missed a cut since April, and he's definitely been grinding it out, and this is definitely a good spot for him with how many greens he hits. So I think he's the other play that I like a lot. Some other guys that are up in the model, Boo Weekley, Martin Laird, Kyle Reifers. Those are the guys that are rating well in the model. Spencer Levine, I guess, is also up there, who I probably wouldn't take too much of, but I can see, just looking through the stats here, a couple of reasons why he's in the model. Colin, curious your thoughts, and I have to imagine Chez Reavie's near the top of the list, or not the top guy.
Oh man, it's the grind season, and Chez Reavie is the best value on the board. This is taking us back to our glory days when we just first started off this podcast. So I guess he's a little bit lower because his recent course history isn't great. He missed the cut in 13 and 15. There was a top 10 in 2011. So I think I don't know, like there's maybe a little bit underweighting there. But ever since, like, you know, he had a little rough patch around June, he hasn't missed a cut since then, and his price has only gone down since then. So he continues to improve in form while his price goes down, combined with the fact that I think he's just one of those, like, perfect DFS guys where his upside doesn't match his price, and so he represents solid average value. Yep, number one on the board. Perfectly fitting with the theme this week, second value guy on the board is Roberto Castro, who's all the way down at 6,000. I think I've talked about him a bunch before, but I was surprised to see him this low. There's decent course history here, and by the way, he hasn't missed a cut since April, and there are some really solid finishes in there as well. So, like, I don't know what I'm missing there other than just 6,000 is way too cheap in there. Other guy, I agree with the Levine pick for sure. The Norlander one is, I mean, I think it's still solid. The only one that would give me pause, he has probably the least volume of anyone. All the good value plays in this tier, so it's a little bit of a risk for cash, especially when you have guys like Reeve and Castro who are just way better above him. And then I think Levine is the best under 6K if you really want to fill it out cheap. And then other two guys I like for sure, Martin Laird and Bryan Harmon, who are similarly cheap. Probably Harmon a little bit more than Laird from a value perspective.
Like all those calls, Castro, I just saw down the model. I definitely knew that you were going to love him. That's way too cheap at 6K.
This is such a vintage. This is like a March podcast all over again. Reeve and Castro. I am so excited for this week.
Pete, I'm curious your thoughts on you had in your videos that you put out every week where you go through your model. Something you've been talking about recently is that you've been chasing birdies a little bit more, and this is sort of going into a question where that I've asked Colin, you know, in the last several podcasts is, you know, do you treat the value players differently? You know, do you go for different things? Do you know you just you know, we can't break up our models and say, okay, for the cheap guys, I'm going to wait adjusted round score. More importantly, then I can rely on, you know, course fit for the mid tier, and then I can really chase birdies with the top guys. But are there certain things that you look for in this lower tier? Like, you know, we have Patton Kizzire, who's 6'8", is a guy who usually has a lot of birdie potential. You know, I'm just curious if you know, just go for safety in the lower tier and then get birdies later, if you just sort of treat all players the same.
It's definitely a little bit different, but I mean, obviously you're just trying to find the best values. I do think that, especially with the lower tier, when you're, you know, 6'9" and below, you really just want these guys to make the cut. You know, most of these guys that are down here in the bottom are not the best birdie makers. You want the guys who are making a ton of cuts. You know, it's nice when you can find guys who are somewhat consistent, are making, you know, relatively more birdies than other guys in the range, but definitely in the lower price tier, it's just all about consistency and cut making in events like this.
Pat Kizzire at all?
I'm not on Kizzire at this point, but I definitely think that's an intriguing play. I'll have to look more into him. Colin, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he's up there for me for sure. Also has a little bit low volume, like maybe a little bit more than Norlander, but otherwise I think he represents solid value.
Cool.
All right. Let's move to the next tier then. So it's going to be 7, 8, 9. Colin, I'll let you kick off this one.
All right, number one with a bullet is a name I feel like I haven't seen in a while, Kevin Kisner. And it's kind of an all of the above play. So his recent results have been pretty great. Ever since July, there's basically been like 3 top 25 finishes, just posting just generally solid results. I think his course history is probably the best here, only like in this range, second only to Jerry Kelly down there at the bottom, who's just too low overall that I don't think is enough to play a pure course history play. But he has 3 results here, made the cut all 3 times, including an 8th in 2014. His course fit is about as good as you can hope for this accuracy course. And I think he's number 1 overall. The guy that kind of clocks in a junior version of that is William McGirt, who we seem to mention from time to time. A little bit A little bit worse course history, but it's still good course history, and definitely a better course fit from the stat. Also has a little bit more volume underneath him, so a little bit more of a known quantity. Other than that, Rafa Cabrera-Bello is here, although depending on how much you want to weight bad course history, probably has the worst of this tier. I should say second worst, only to JB Holmes, which of course breaks my heart. And then Keegan Bradley's playing well, but we're just going to do our usual 30 seconds of weeping and gnashing of teeth about how that's just a troll on us. So do what you will with it. But I think Kisner is definitely my favorite play in the mid-range.
Hit on all the guys I was going to talk about. Real quickly on Keegan Bradley, he is playing a lot better now, but I don't know. I still hate him. His putting has been a little bit more consistent, which is definitely really what you're watching again. There's reasons for, there's a lot of reasons to think that there's merit to him falling off. Obviously, the big thing is switching to a different type of putter. He was one of the guys who used the long putter and had to adjust. And then in addition to that, people speculate that the Jordan and the celebrity status might have caught up with him a bit. But he seems to be grinding back, and, it's paying me to watch him do well.
What does he have to do for you, Pete?
He's playing well enough. I think he's fine. I mean, I played him last week.
I think you're taking it appropriately personally that he's playing better, as you should. That's the right way to deal with that.
Right. Jerry Kelly is the highest guy ranked in my model in this range. I think he's really cheap. I like all the guys that you named. I think that they're all really nice plays. One guy that you did not name that I think I will have exposure to potentially in cash games, or at least I'm looking at it, is Jason Duffner, who has been really consistent just in general. He hasn't missed a cut since the Masters, and before that, I think he only has one missed cut, in his last 15, 20 tournaments. He's a very solid cash game play at 7,900. I think he's fine. The form and everything like that's not, above and beyond spectacular, but just so consistent. So I think he's a guy for cash games that you have to take a look at. His course history is marginal, which is the only downside, but definitely a guy that I like quite a bit. And it's exactly all the guys that you named. I was going to ask you about a variety of guys here in the top range. I think right above 8-9, there's a couple guys that I'm very intrigued to hear your opinion on, which we can talk about here in a second. But Bryan, did you have any other questions about this tier?
I just JB Holmes. Are we just mad at him for a little while? Is he just in our doghouse?
Well, I was going to bring him up anyway. What's tilting me is that he's his results have been getting worse, but his price is going higher, and that just offends me on a personal level. Because that's naturally going to mean that he's going to do a lot better, and just, I'm going to never get on the right side of him. I really don't understand why his price is going up when he has just been not good in his last couple outings. There's a reason I'm not bringing it up like I normally do. It's because, his recent form is not good. And it's not
a good fit either, and he has bad course history too. So he'll
probably be about inspiring. Here, Pete, the one counter take I might want to give on Duffner. So the thing I do agree with is if you want to pay for consistency, that's fine. But if what if my counter my instead pick would probably be something like Danny Lee, who is arguably as consistent with cut making as Jason Duffner at the same time period. The only cut he missed was the British Open, and I'd have to take a look at his draw, but you remember how windy it was that tournament. That could just be because he got a lousy draw. He has a higher volume.
He did get a lousy draw, I'm almost positive, because I was originally going to be on.
So basically, I look at Danny Lee and Jason Duffner having the same average consistency. Lee does it at at least 25-30% higher volume, and he's $600 cheaper. I would never normally I incline to Duffner as well because he's it's cash game Duffner, but Lee just pops to me as the better cash game pick. And I was curious to think what do you think I might be missing, because it's kind of a surprise pick.
The data looks fine on him. I totally get it, but I think that he's reasonable. I do. Maybe I'm biased. I just think Duffner just seems a little safer to me. But looking here at the data, it seems really close. So I don't know. I'll have to look at that more.
It's casually following along, I would have assumed Duffner was safer by a mile, but just Danny Lee is seems to be beating him in a lot of different categories, not the least of which is salary.
Right. One other guy that I forgot to name that does fall into the category of a big birdie maker, he's fallen on the weighted birdie average list because some of these rounds he just doesn't make any birdies. But when he starts pouring them in, they come in bunches, and that's Justin Thomas at 8,600, coming up a 62, I believe was his last round. So I think he's an elite option in terms of upside for tournaments. I really like him. And I do think that just from watching him, he doesn't hit the driver as well off the tee. When he can take shorter clubs off the tee, generally helps him. Because if he stays in fairways and he gets in a groove, he can really go after pins and make a lot of birdies in a row.
Yeah, and
why do you think his birdies would come in bunches? I'm truly curious. Like, and is that a repeatable?
And I don't know if it's repeatable, but it is what it is right now. Like, for a while this year, he's just had some of these rounds. Even at the U.S. Open, he had just an insane round in the U.S. Open where he just made everything. But birdie streaks, I need to look that up, but he's got to be near the top of the list. He's made a ton of those, and he's still in the top quarter in weighted birdie average on the PGA Tour. He was top 10 early on in the year. He's also a young guy, same age as Spieth and Grillo, all those guys. So the talent's certainly there. He was touted just as much as Jordan Spieth when they were in college, and they were big rivals. So I don't know what it is, but just if you go back and look through his rounds this year, he gets super hot. And he is another guy that people talk about just, on tour, that sometimes he can get mentally off and it seems like things, will never get back in sync. But then when he's hot, it's amazing to watch. I mean, he literally, from watching him when he shot that 62, like every shot was super close, and he gets the putter going. It's just, I don't know. I'll have to look more into that.
It could be a mental thing. Yeah, I believe that exists, and maybe that does exist in spurts. And it's just like, okay, well, maybe you can't predict it. And,
you can see it with Rory, too. Like, Rory gets it going. He has that different walk. Again, this is super subjective, and it's dangerous to start thinking about stuff like this. But Rory definitely gets birdies in bunches, and Justin Thomas kind of has that same thing to me.
I'm curious about this, Pete. Do you think it's more about whether their putter's on or whether how close they can get? Because I was looking at Justin Thomas, he was really intriguing to me as well. And the thing that stood out was his recent greens in regulation, and that stood out to me when I was watching the Olympics. Was more so than just his putty being was on. He was just sticking everything close, which I guess naturally makes it easier for your putter to be on. But it almost seems like if we're going to predict these birdie streaks, it's just more of who hits the greens more so than who is really just putting the best. I don't know.
Right, yeah. The Travelers, he was just absolutely ridiculous. That last round, he just came on and had a chance to basically win. He was out of contention, and then he puts up a 62. It was just ridiculous. So I don't know what it is. Maybe it's getting it closer. The putter definitely for most of these guys, when they get hot with the putter, that's what normally leads to the birdies. But I've seen him multiple times this year, especially at the U.S. Open where those greens were really tough and it was hard to go at some of those flags. He was just putting it so close. And it does make sense to me just playing golf. It definitely seems like one of those things where if you're mentally feeling good and confident, not having to worry about your swing, things can go really well. And when things go bad, it's easy to have, tilt in your game, which will affect you mentally. And then also, if you're not confident in your swing, you start trying to manufacture things, and that's normally when your swing is the worst.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, definitely interesting point. You're right. Thomas is definitely a young guy. And I actually wanted to bring this point up for you, Colin. I know that you're usually a hater of the young guys. Thomas is 23. You're not. I know you're not a fan. And one of our writers, Kelly, actually brought this up in one of his articles today. He wrote, Sam Snead won the inaugural Wyndham Championship in 1938. He then won it 7 more times, his final victory coming at the age of 52. Also, Davis Love III won this event last year at the age of 51. So it seems like Colin's thing of just targeting old guys, hitting the young guys, going for age 50 and up. This seems like this is your tournament, Colin.
I think I keep getting misconstrued every single time. Although, if I'm if DraftKings ever puts up slates for the Champions Tour, then obviously I will be playing that exclusively, and we'll be redirecting all content towards tracking Colin Montgomery and Bernard Langer. But that is a good is there something to this being an adult swim tournament where the old guys do well? It's a fun narrative to think about, but Yeah, I don't see the old guy that's going to do it this week either.
Current champion's 52 years old, so that means something.
Is he even playing? Is he defending his title? I don't think so.
I don't know. All right, we can move on to this upper tier. And Pete, I'll kick to you to start this off. So these are going to be the top guys, and I think a lot of interesting guys in this 9K range. So I'll let you go. These are going to be guys that are 9,000 or higher on DraftKings.
So there's a ton of guys. Originally, I was going to ask who you prefer, Colin, Cabrera or Kevin Na, because Kevin Na is currently rating as a top player in my model, which is interesting to me. He's just been really consistent and really good recently in terms of his green and regulation. The one thing that's not great for me with him is his course form's not elite, but that's all right. I like him quite a bit. I'm curious your take there. But just a couple other guys. I think Webb Simpson is someone we have to really look at. Definitely has one of the strongest course histories of anyone. I believe he's had like 6 top 25s or something like that at this tournament. He's definitely a guy that I'm looking at quite a bit. And I've seen some recent things just from the subjective angel watching that his putters come a long ways, and I think he's going to be playing pretty well in this spot. In addition to that, I think Furyk's a guy that a lot of people will look at. I like Bill Haas, too, who I believe is from the area, who has a good course history as well. So I think he's in play. And then there's other guys. If you're chasing birdies, Hideki Matsuyama is definitely that guy. I was really worried about his health and his hip, which is why I didn't have as much exposure as I should have in the PGA Championship because his price was so low. But a guy that I'm willing to take a flyer on for GPPs would never touch in cash because he's had way too many missed cuts and the prices come up so much. The exact opposite of that in terms of style, just in general, is Jim Furyk, who I think we can put to bed any concern about his wrist after he broke the PGA record with a 58 on the Travelers Championship. So, Colin, what are your thoughts on all those guys? And I guess answer that first question, Kevin Na versus Cabrera Bello, where are you going there?
I guess that depends on whether or not you pay for consistency again. I have Na rated slightly higher. I mean, it's really close between the two. I guess it depends on, do you want, for what it's worth, Na's only course history is outside of my 5-year window. And so for me, I'm treating him as though he has no course history. So as opposed to Cabrera Bello, who has decidedly negative history, they're both really close. Otherwise, I'd probably give a slightest of the edge to Na. If you're straight up picking between the two, I'd go Na for sure. As far as other guys you mentioned, I agree with Matsuyama entirely. I don't even a GPP flyer at most.
Yeah, he's
right.
Super high risk, never in cash.
So you don't trust these back, Colin?
No, not at all. I mean, no. That's I know he's injured, and I just kind of have to. The data-driven approach says wait and see, and post actual good results before it's there. But his results have been bad enough for me to be concerned. I think Webb Simpson is probably pound for pound the best in this field. I think he has the best course history in the whole field. I think if you compare him versus, the price difference alone with Patrick Reed is huge, and I think it's way easier to build a lineup around Simpson than Reed, and they're both really closely projected, and one's 2,000 cheaper than the other. Other guys that I like, I agree with Furyk. He'll probably be pretty heavily owned. He's still pretty expensive. The other guy that I really like this week, surprise, surprise, is Tyrrell Hatton, who I have this feeling that this is going to be the last week that we can all bet again and before the secret's out, if it's not already. There's no course history here, but the course fit is pretty decent. It's a pretty solid set of results, and just 9,400. Pete, you saw him play, right? He passes the eye test.
I definitely meant to mention him, but I wanted to save you at least one guy. He's not a perfect.
In honor of you picking Great Britain for the Olympic win, thank you for leaving me Tyrrell Hatton. That feels about appropriate. I think it's pretty much Simpson and Hatton are the easiest ones to anchor your lineups with. I could see Na for sure. Haas I like as well. Although, he's recently not been maybe as consistent as you might think otherwise. But, it's he has the next best course history here outside of
he's from the area, too. He's a local guy.
Yeah, and I know we've gone back and forth, there has to be something there. So, I'm probably missing something with the local guy factor. So I can definitely see that being kind of a subjective bump. Right. But, those are – I don't I don't feel the need to pay up for Patrick Reed this week or Ricky Fowler. I don't even factor in how they're how the Olympics affects how they're playing this week, even if that's a thing.
Right. I definitely think for cash games, I would consider Hatton, Haas, and Simpson over the other guys. I do think Furyk is probably going to be the most heavily owned, especially after everyone saw that highlight of his 58 versus Matsuyama and Reed. Matsuyama is only intriguing to me for tournaments because I do think that people are still scared. His game log stinks. I'm definitely scared for tournaments, or scared in general for cash. But for tournaments, I think his upside with his birdie making, he's still one of the best guys in the entire PGA Tour. Right now, he's 5th on the year in weighted birdie average, and he's not even a great putter. So if he's right, I think he's a tournament play, but he'd be one of the last guys I'd ever take in a cash game.
Yeah, I think his ownership will probably be pretty low at this point. So that's
right.
what
I think it's gonna be real low.
I think, yeah.
In the Rafa versus Kevin Na question, I thought the more appropriate twosome to debate would be Hatton and Wesley Bryan. And so, Colin, I'll go right back to you. I asked you, I said, what does Wesley Bryan have to do? And you said, just keep on doing it. And then he had a top 10 finish right after that. So I guess my question again is, he just can't get the respect of this podcast to be mentioned. Well, what does he have to do? Just keep on top 10 finishing? Because that's what he's doing.
What do you think my answer is going to be? Yeah, to follow the Jon Rahm path to success, where Jon Rahm,
too.
Yeah, I know, other than be the best golfer at his age on the planet, nothing else that much. Jon Rahm, in my mind, still barely has enough data to even register. And yes, I know maybe that's overly conservative, but that's I ran the whole lineup study. Just again, in general, low volume players are risk in cash games, unless you know for sure that Jon Rahm is just all right, he's absolutely going to be a sure thing. The next 15, the next 20 tournaments are going to be the last 5 or around average. No, I don't have that crystal ball, and neither do you.
Do you think that's weighted down by 98% of the low volume players not being as talented as Rahm and whoever the young guys are that we're on?
Oh, sure. It could be, but then you also have to ask, in general, you could probably do a more sophisticated analysis and say, all right, how does it work as far as expected? But expectation is already pretty low for the low volume guys, and it's mostly, it's semi-anecdotal, but again, I've seen high-ranked low volume players inevitably regress. And we've talked about them before, so I have to assume that it's gonna hold up in the future as well. Now, yeah, the data doesn't know that he's an amateur champion and he brings very different things to the table here, and I fully get that. So I could be missing out on something, but I still don't feel bad about skipping on him in the meantime, or if it be Rahm or Wesley Bryan for that matter.
I'm definitely higher on Rahm than Bryan, but I like him. I saw him, and he was the #1 guy in my models, and I didn't have any exposure to him. And I felt stupid because he was winning the tournament for the first couple of days, and then still had finished 8th in the John Deere. But yeah, I was going to mention Rahm. I needed to, I don't want to jinx anything, but another made cut for him, and he's one of the elite favorites. Basically, there's 7, 8, 9 guys that are in the 20 to 30 to 1 range to win the tournament, and he's one of them. So clearly the markets are picking up on him, and I do think that he's definitely way above Bryson at this point.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Way. Bryson's going to have to fix his short game. He's going to have to get away from that 6-iron long, he's going to have to get away from his wedge that's the length of a 6-iron before I trust him.
That's fair. Do you think Wesley Bryan's a little the public's biased on him because of these trick shot videos on YouTube? They just sort of think that a guy who's just doing trick shot videos is on web.com just can't be actually talented.
I like Bryan. I just think that, all these results are in just lower tier tournaments. Even the John Deere, it wasn't as high, that's the quality of player. The average quality of player is not as high. So I want to see more from him, and I want to see more events where he's playing against, elite golfers.
How dare you guys? With this,
I like him, though. He's fun to watch. I know the trick videos. I like him.
Okay. And so thoughts on Patrick Reed before we finish up? And we didn't really hit on Ricky Fowler. What are your thoughts on Reed's ownership in tournaments specifically?
I'm off him. I'm not going to play him. It's too much this week. And he might be owned because people know who he is. And He's won, and also the Ryder Cup is getting close, and he's definitely the guy that everyone knows is like the passionate American, and he wants to make sure he plays on that team. So there's all the motivation factors working for you, but I just like some of the guys better below him.
And you're off Ricky?
Not playing Ricky unless it's a tournament, and even then I won't play Ricky in tournaments most likely, just because every time he's in the field, he's still 15 to 20% owned because people like to roster Ricky Fowler.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, we can end it there, and I guess.
Yeah, Brian, you're gonna put the fade Ricky watermark after we're done recording this, right? Like we talked about last time, the standard issue FantasyLabs recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of just not even worth discussing. Just put that all up there and move on.
We gotta pick a winner too. You guys want to do under 9K again?
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. You can't stand to be tied. You're jonesing for that. Wow.
Oh, my Knox was way better than your English. Don't even try to make that like similar. It's 1-to-1 on the scoreboard. It's not even like
an ugly win is still an ugly win.
But it's not even close. My win was glorious. Knox had an epic celebration on the green. Having him win an actual tournament against a huge field versus picking a country out of 64 guys. Not even close. You weren't high on Justin Rose. I'm still up in my mind, which is matters to me.
I can't hear you over the sound of how tied we are on the scoreboard right now. Sorry.
Yeah, all right, fine, tied. All right, I'm making the first pick then. Justin Thomas.
Justin Thomas.
Great pick. All right, I haven't gone last yet, so Brian, I think you're up now.
Okay. Okay, I like the Justin Thomas. I also really like Jason Duffner, but I'm not going to go Duff. I'm instead, just for Pete, I'm going to go Keegan. I'm just going to be.
Oh, wow.
Go Keegan.
There you go. Yeah, I think in this.
I was wondering if you were going to do that. I mean,
that's fine.
I feel like if you pick Keegan, that should be worth like a 3x on our scoreboard. I think that's a fair multiplier.
If he wins.
The trolling at that point, but yeah, I like that. All right, I'll go my surprise pick. I like the mid-range, Kevin Kisner.
I like that call. I think Kisner is the other guy that's really elite. And I do like the Keegan call, Brian. And definitely a better play than Duffner. Duffner will make the cut, but he's going to finish like 45th. So.
I do like Rafa would have qualified too.
Rafa's the chalk. I thought someone was going to take Rafa, but I like our picks here. I think we got some good ones, guys.
Okay. All right, we'll end it there. Thanks. Yeah, thanks everyone for listening as usual. Good luck this week in the Czech Masters and the Wyndham, and we'll talk to you guys next week.